Hello everyone, and welcome to our first cast of a new series called Family and Friends. So during this series, we are going to uncover some words of wisdom from my family and friends. And today I'd like to introduce you to my first guest and sister, Jonine Baker, communication specialist and a director and founder of Lead Farmers Australia. So Jonine has been sharing her communication knowledge with Australia for many years now, and I'm delighted to be the first person to officially announce that she is entering the New Zealand market by the magic of technology. So today, Jonine is going to share with us 5 communication hacks that we can use in our day-to-day phone and face-to-face engagements. So welcome, Jonine. Thank you for joining us, and perhaps you could start by introducing yourself.
It's my pleasure, Kayleen. Hello, everybody listening in New Zealand. About 10 years ago, I set up my business Lead Farmers and was offering a concierge phone service to a lot of property developers here in Australia. And in the very early stages, I realised that one of the biggest challenges a lot of people have is when they communicate over the phone. So I conducted a study starting back in 2010, and to this day I think I've analysed well over 100,000 customer communications, a lot of which I've actually conducted myself. And it has been a very interesting discovery in understanding the nuances and about what works and what doesn't work on a phone call, which is very different to a face-to-face. And also getting clear on the strengths and weaknesses of phone discussion. So I guess that's part of what we're going to be discussing today, Kayleen.
Thank you, Jonine. I'm sure it's bound to be an exciting and informative session. So we'll start with your first hack. So that is understanding listening budgets. So please go ahead.
Yes, a lot of people probably don't realise there is such a thing, but I'll explain. There was a wonderful book that was written by a gentleman by the name of John Gray. I think he was a relationship psychologist. And Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus was the title, I believe. And it was written back in the 90s. And there's probably a number of people that still recall that title. And in that book, he revealed he'd conducted a study between the differences of men and women. And one of the ones that stood out for me, one of the outcomes that stood out for me, was the fact that he'd uncovered women have a speaking budget on average a day of about 30,000 words, and men have a speaking budget of about 10,000. I think we all kind of understand that men say a lot less than women in a day. But what I discovered through my study, about the same applies in relation to listening. Now, and my theory is this: if you can learn to communicate with a male, because they're going to be your more challenging audience, then you're going to be fine with women. And that is face-to-face and over the phone. So let's assume the same percentages relate to listening. Now, so therefore a male listening budget per se is about 30% of that compared to a female's listening budget. So I think in business and your personal life and socially as well, particularly over the phone, if you are speaking with a male, you've got to be very careful about the amount of words you use. You try and pull out all those filler words in a phone conversation particularly. Now, I also apply this to emails as well. When I'm writing an email to a client, I'll always sort of target the male audience. I'll write the full email out, and then I look at how I can reduce that down to just bullet points and lots of white paper. If you think about the ratio of listening and speaking, apply the same ratio to paper. So in other words, you might have a paragraph with 2 or 3 sentences in, knock that down into 3 bullet points, and then pull out all the filler words, so that when somebody's looking at that email, particularly a male, is only seeing very specific points. And also I would be conscious of the line spacing in that email. I'm inclined to go 1.15 or a 1.5 line spacing to ensure there's lots of white paper, so there's less clutter visually. the same as less clutter audibly when speaking to somebody.
Wow, that's fascinating, Jane. I had never thought of relating that to the written word as well. And so I'm definitely going to have a look at what I do in my emails. So thank you, very enlightening. Okay, so
well, if you think about how you view an email, Kayleen, when you are a busy person, you get an email, if it's got lots of words in it, they're bulky paragraphs in that, you're less inclined to read it straight away. You're more inclined to farm it or, store it for later. So think about that.
Absolutely, and I have been guilty of going partway through an email and thinking that I've actually got all the information that I need and not reading the rest, only to find that I haven't had all the information. So yeah, okay. So great. Hack number 2, Jonine, double-barreled questions. Please tell us what they are and how they can be effective.
So a double-barreled question is a statement with 2 questions at the end. So it's got a left and a right per se. So you've got to look at it as if you're coming to an intersection and you're giving a person the option of either going left or right, not straight ahead. I look at straight ahead as a closed question. And really, I think we all know in business and in communications, particularly in sales, you avoid closed questions unless you are expecting or you want that person to give you a yes/no answer. So a double-barrel question has 2 options in it. Now, the beauty of a double-barrel question is it keeps people in the conversation. So if you're the one instigating the phone call, you would have your brief introduction. As we mentioned earlier, it's good to pull out all those filler words, have your brief introduction, then finish your introduction with a double-barreled question. Now, a couple of options I thought about that might relate to perhaps people listening to this is you might ask the person answering the phone on the other end, who could be a person in recruitment, I understand there was a position or an opportunity listed on Seek. Is this opportunity still available, or have you closed applications? So that's a very typical double-barrel question. If you're I'm trying to think of another one. If you're looking to speak with somebody and you've come to the person at the front line and you want to speak to John Smith, you might say, is John Smith available to take my call, or would it be more efficient for me to send him an email? Another double-barreled question. So it's always quite good to have one of those lined up straight after your introduction.
That's great. So in the essence, are we then providing them with only 2 options to encourage one or the other so that we can respond rapidly?
Yes, because a lot of people, particularly if they instigate the communication audibly, they ask a closed question, and that, therefore they're getting a yes/no answer. So have a think about the 2 options you want that person to answer, this one or that one, and make sure that's what follows your introduction.
Great, thank you, Jonine. Okay, so we'll move along to hack number 3. And this I find fascinating and mysterious. So we're on to conversation hypnosis. What is that?
I believe it is actually a term, but it was one that I thought I'd come up with myself, because I have been accused of this. Many years ago, I worked in insurance, and there was a couple of situations where customers had raised their hand and said they weren't aware that they had actually signed up a contract for a particular policy. This happened a couple of times. Fortunately enough, all the calls are recorded, and so my management, my team leader in management said, look, we're just going to listen to these recordings. It might take us a few days and we're going to come back to you. And I was very concerned at the time, because I thought, well, I've never strong-armed anybody into anything in sales. I like to think my strategies are lovely and smooth. When they came back to me, well, particularly the management team, the head guy had a very big grin on his face. He said, okay, I've listened to your calls, Jonine, and we're going to call it being Jonined. And I didn't know what he meant by that. I didn't know what he meant by that. But he said, even I wanted to buy what you were offering. So I thought that was a little bit reckless to have people feel that they weren't aware that they'd actually signed up or committed to something. So I started to think more closely about how I sounded over the phone, and I wanted to use those skills more consciously. So I started to do some research about what is it about a voice that lulls people into being so comfortable they just come along for the ride. And that's what I mean by a conversation hypnosis. They just feel so comfortable at listening to you, they just want to come along for the ride. And this has taken years for me to polish, and it is very much a learned skill, but it comes in 3 parts. Now, the big chunk of this is how you sound. It's the tone of your voice. And I'm sure you've probably thought of, I'm sure you've experienced times over the years where you've heard a voice over the phone or face to face, and you just kind of want to sit back in your chair and think, oh, I'll listen to anything you have to say. Now, there's a couple of voices that spring to mind for me, and one of them is Morgan Freeman. And he does a lot of narratives for documentaries and that, and the reason he does is because of exactly that. He's just so calming and interesting to listen to. And David Attenborough is another one. There's a beautiful tone about the way they speak. And again, it's a learned skill. It is not something that we're born with. None of us were born even speaking, so that doesn't make sense. So it is actually a learned skill. So I would suggest about 75% of the impact of what comes out of here is the tone in your voice. Now, the other 2 parts of this are pace in which you speak. If you have a calmness about the way you speak, and it's not just the tone, but the pace in which you speak, people will stay on the phone or they'll stay engaged listening with you for a lot longer. The opposite actually can escalate people's stress levels. So if you're speaking fast, particularly in a phone conversation, you can escalate people's stress levels. Now, the final part to this equation is sound bites. And a very good example of what a sound bite is when you listen to your news readers at night, particularly on channels like SBS and ABC. They've got beautifully polished voices, but you can hear the way they emphasize certain words adds drama or mystery or intrigue or warmth to what they say, and that comes a lot not just from the tone but the way they group their words together. Now, when I'm writing a script for somebody to have a phone discussion, I'll often use the rule of about 3 to 4 words in a soundbite, and that just allows for the person to keep up. It keeps your voice at a lovely calm rate, but it groups your words together to add a little bit of context, a little bit of impact to what you're saying. So it's tone, which is the majority, and then the 25% balance of the rest is a combination of pace and your sound bites.
So interesting, Jonine. And I know I'm very guilty of fast talking on the phone, and I often get off a phone conversation and go, that was way too fast. And if I'm in an environment with other people, I was also way too loud.
Well, a lot of that can come from anxiety as well, Kayleen. When you instigate the call, and not you particularly, but just in general, when people have a purpose to that call, they get on the phone, it's not just a friend thing, they are trying to achieve an objective in the call, their anxiety levels can escalate a little bit with the focus of trying to, with that agenda, and that's what can can speed your voice up and also escalate your tone above where it should be. We're all guilty of it.
So as you say, this is something that comes with practice. So now you've made us mindful of the factors that contribute to that, and now we can all start being mindful in our practice of that, right?
Well, a nice addition to that is record yourself on your phone, and if you are using your phone, just borrow somebody else's, and you don't have to record the other person or their reaction. Just record your own voice. You become your best teacher in situations like this. So just listen to yourself and think, and most of us are very critical anyway, but that is the best way to find out how you're sounding.
Well, that's great. I might do that after this. Okay.
Be kind.
Yeah, that's right. Because most of us don't believe it's our voice when we hear it back, and most of us cringe as well. Okay,
Yeah.
so lovely. Right, so let's move on to hack number 4. Being mindful of your mindset.
Mindset is critical. Everything that comes out of here is going to be, in the main, a direct reflection of what's going on up here. Now, if you, again, are on the phone, and this is always the biggest challenge, face-to-face, we've got a lot of distractions that work in our favour. Like if we're well groomed and we present well with our posture and colour and all that sort of thing. These are beautiful distractions when somebody's actually looking at us. But on the phone, there is only one thing a person can gauge from, and that is the sound of our voice. Now, if you are, say, for example, in a sales position, or even in the position where you are being interviewed in a role, there is a high chance that your anxiety levels have escalated a little bit. And that could be, and a little bit of apprehension about the call. And that's all going to reflect in the way you sound. So to me, it's very important before you engage in that conversation, you do what we call be centered. And breathing is probably the main tool here, and that's breathing from right down in the belly. If you were to take 10 breaths before a very important call, it will calm your whole physiology, and that will reflect in your voice, and it will reflect in your language. It's also going to put oxygen in your brain, so that because what happens with anxiety, of course, our cortisol levels increase and old stupid brain kicks in, and that's where we start to waffle and we lose track of what we really are trying to say. So breathing will calm you and put you in a much more centered mindset to handle that situation.
Right, so when you say breathing from your belly, is there a really quick lesson or a quick tip you can give us on that? Because I've tried it.
Actually. Yeah, okay, so if you're standing up, but sitting down either way, but you may want to stand, and you put your hand between your pelvic bone and your belly button. So you would slide it in the middle there, so that you know that is the point that you've got to feel the rise and fall. Most people breathe from here, and that's where the anxiety and the stress starts to show. But if you put your hand down and below the belly button, that is where you want your belly to swell. And you have to breathe to feel that swelling in your belly. And then when you release the breath, you want to clench that in a bit like a bellow. So you feel the oxygen come straight out. And that's a lot of, when we feel stress and anxiety, we have a lot of toxins that start, a lot of gases that form in our bodies. So you really want to release it too. And I would recommend you do that 10 times before you have to tackle a call that you are not empowered to control, that you are the person on the, perhaps you're being interviewed, or you're nervous about trying to close a particular deal or engage with a customer, anywhere that's going to create a bit of stress.
That's great advice. And again, I guess perfection comes with practice in that, because I know for myself, I'm a very shallow breather. So I will practice that, because I've found it difficult to understand what deep breathing means. So thank you for that.
Breathing from the belly.
Okay, awesome. All right, so now we're going to move on to hack number 5, Jonine. Your physicality affects your communication. So this is a great topic. You and I spoke about that last week. And you pointed out in my vlogs that I'm very much an amateur at. My posture was to lean forward.
I didn't say she was an amateur.
Oh, no. My approach was to lean forward, and I did that because it was comfortable. I wanted to engage my audience. And in fact, you said, no, I need to, or advised me to consider sitting up. So do you want to elaborate more on our physicality?
Sure. So even though a phone call is strictly an audible thing, there are a lot of things that impact the sound of your voice. Now, when you're leaning forward, you're inclined to sort of slouch a little bit. It changes your physiology and it sends a message to your brain that this is a very relaxed situation. Equally the same as when you're leaning back too far. However it is, if it's not directly upright, it's probably sending the wrong message to your brain, and your brain is going to chill into that same physical state. For me, I suggest that, well, I always, when I'm on the phone conducting calls, I make sure I'm sitting upright. I also make sure both my feet are planted on the ground, and that earths me as well. It gives me confidence in what I'm about to do, as opposed to crossing my legs. When you cross your legs, you are suggesting that you're getting into a relaxed state as well. When you're standing up on a call, it sends a sound of domination across the phone. It kind of conveys too much confidence. So there's only one position you should be in, particularly if the call is a serious one. It's an essential where you've got to convey confidence and it's professional. You sit upright, both feet on the ground. Now, when you're sitting upright, your neck is aligned with your spine, which also means that your throat is open. If you sit back, you're tilting your head forward, your throat starts to close, and this impacts the tone in your voice. And you might think, oh, that's a silly little detail. But once again, the tone is 75% of the power of what you sound like. So upright keeps a nice open throat, which also projects and conveys a much clearer tone, stronger tone to your voice.
Wow.
And the square shoulders, now they can't see that really, but the square shoulders all part of the same posture. The broader your shoulders, the more confidence you will transmit in what you're saying. So once again, like this or getting back like that is all impacting what comes out of here. So sitting upright to get the throat open, the broad shoulders projects a strength about what you're saying, which is a certainty in your voice. It all absolutely matters. And there's such small elements, but I tell you what, if you're really wanting to nail something, you want to factor in all these elements. Now, the other thing to top that off is a very gentle or soft smile, because when you're you haven't got any of this to look at like what we've got now, you've only got your voice on the phone. A soft smile will add a warmth to the sound of your voice, but it also opens your throat to also impact the sound, how you sound over the phone.
Right, and you're absolutely right, because I can tell when I'm talking to somebody who's got a really calm demeanor about them, and they probably are wearing that soft smile that you refer to. You can really hear it, and you can be professional, you know, and have that softness about your tone as well. Well, Jonine, that's been amazing. I think my audience is going to find that fascinating, and I hope you'll join us again. I'm sure there's many topics that we'll be able to talk on. So will you come back again?
Of course. I would love to.
And do you have any final words for our audience?
If the call or the communication is a very important one, invest some time before you get to either the meeting or pick up the phone particularly. Invest some time in those different elements that I've spoken of. Listen to this again and just spend a few moments on getting yourself right and centered, so all of this just flows. And practice does make perfect. There is one more thing. As far as mindset is concerned, one thing we're all guilty of is criticizing ourselves when we know we've said the wrong thing or gone about things in the wrong way in a call. You know, that voice that says on the shoulder, you could have done better on that one. You forgot to do this. You forgot to do that. It's a little like two devils sitting on the shoulder. Worst thing you can do, you've always got to keep in your mind that if you're wanting to improve these skills, You are work in progress. If you keep saying to yourself, I'm work in progress, I'm getting better at this all the time, you are sending a direct message to the brain, and you're telling it, okay, I'm getting better. Think about this up here. Sometimes it's like your little child. If you berate it and criticize it, it starts to shut down on you. So be encouraging to yourself if you feel that you didn't pick all of these little hacks up and put them all into that first call.
And our audience now has this at their fingertips to review whenever they wish. So it's a small training session for nothing, for free.
Yeah, absolutely free.
So Jonine, I'm just going to thank our audience for watching. It's been a pleasure listening to you. I'm just fascinated by everything that you've learned over the years and that you share, and I'm sure the New Zealand market will be very keen to engage with you as well. So you know my typical goodbye. It's thank you for watching. Bye for now. Come on, Jonine, bye for now.
Bye for now.
Stay safe.